Death and destruction after two powerful earthquakes struck Venezuela. The disaster comes just months after US forces abducted the former president. So how may that impact the flow of aid from Washington, and what kind of politics are at play? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. Already engulfed in a severe economic and political crisis, Venezuela has this week been hit by two devastating earthquakes. They were the strongest tremors in more than a century. Authorities are focused on finding and rescuing survivors. Many countries have already mobilised teams and resources to help with this mission. But all eyes are on Washington. President Donald Trump has pledged to support relief efforts for Venezuela. But after US forces captured and arrested the former president in January, many are asking how far that support will go. We'll talk to our panel of guests about it in just a moment. But first, this report from Dmitry Medvedenko.
Hundreds killed, cities devastated after twin earthquakes hit Venezuela. Buildings collapsing within seconds as people ran for their lives. The quakes were the worst since the year 1900. On Wednesday evening, a magnitude 7.2 earthquake struck west of the capital, Caracas. Less than a minute later, a second hit, this one magnitude 7.5. Hundreds of people are missing and believed to be trapped under the rubble, with many feared dead. Thousands have been displaced. The country's acting president has declared a state of emergency, calling for help.
We have requested international assistance. Our best wishes, all of our hope, and all our prayers are with the lives of Venezuelan men and women.
Delcy Rodriguez took power after the US abducted and arrested President Nicolas Maduro in January. Maria, a Miami nurse from Venezuela, says this hasn't helped improve the humanitarian situation.
People tend to think everything is fine in Venezuela, that everything is in order, but that's not the case. Even with the government situation, even with Maduro removed, Venezuela remains the same or worse. I mean, there's no healthcare, there's nothing. I'm a healthcare professional, and I know there's no one left there. All my colleagues have left.
The US is among the many countries sending relief teams into Venezuela, along with Chile, the Dominican Republic, and Spain. Senior Southcom official Major General Kevin Jarrett arrived in Caracas to coordinate efforts. In his comments on the disaster, Donald Trump highlighted the US intervention there.
We took over Venezuela in less than one day, and the oil is flowing, and we're getting along with them great. We're going to, by the way, help them with their they had a tremendous earthquake last night that you read about, massive in Caracas, but we're going to help them out.
Tens of thousands of families have been affected by the twin earthquakes and require aid. And with a change in leadership forced by Washington after years of sanctions, many critics say the US has a responsibility to help. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Before we go to our panel of guests, let's first talk to Jan Egeland. He's the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, which is involved in the humanitarian effort on the ground. He joins us from the Norwegian capital, Oslo. You've been involved in humanitarian efforts. You used to be the humanitarian coordinator and Under-Secretary General of the UN in a previous life for very many years. How severe is the situation on the ground in Venezuela, particularly that this double earthquake seems to have struck the main population centre?
It's absolutely devastating. Remember, this is a catastrophe which comes on top of years of economic crisis, social crisis, political crisis. It's a society that cannot sustain such a devastated natural disaster. We're on the ground, several international organizations, but we are few and we are underfunded. So really it is the neighborhoods that are now doing the search and the rescue for their dear one and near one. And the casualty figures is bound to increase dramatically because so big is the urban area that has been hit, and so bad are the structures that have not been maintained well over many years. So many buildings have collapsed on top of so many people.
So what would you say are the top priorities, and how much will this effort be hindered by the fact that the main airport has itself been disabled?
Well, the first phase is always the search and rescue one, and that's done by your neighbor, by your family, by your friends, to a very large degree. Of course, there is a Venezuelan Red Cross, there is some civil defense and so on, but most is done by the neighbors. That's a search and rescue one. And those who are not rescued within the first 48 hours, they bleed to death very often because limbs are crushed in earthquakes like this. And 3, 4, 5 times more people have wounds than are killed. The second phase is really the humanitarian relief phase, where we will be part, give homes to the homeless, give water and sanitation for those who have lost all of that. It's really emergency relief, and that needs to be scaled up dramatically. And here the neighboring countries, the United States, Europe, the United Nations, and us on the ground need to scale up, but we need funding for that. We have been underfunded for so many years. Then comes, of course, the very important phase of getting back electricity, water supply, the main functions of society, urban society, and then finally the conferences that will get the money for the real reconstruction, which will be in the billions of dollars.
Given the recent military involvement in Venezuela by the US, how important is it that the US provides a lot of that funding that you have mentioned? Because, of course, the US has cut its humanitarian operations since Trump came back to power.
They did, and it was devastating. I mean, the first month of Trump, and we lost everything. But much of that has come back. And now the US will be the number one donor to Venezuela, as they are back to most operations being the most important or one of the most important donors. Let this be the reboot of new relationships between the Venezuelan de facto government, which is without Maduro, and the neighbors and the United States. And we hope that that will happen, because Venezuelans need all the help they can, including the millions and millions who are now outside and who wants to come back to tend for their elderly and their disabled that they left behind when they fled for better economic opportunities.
Jan Egeland, Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lots to discuss about this very grim situation. Joining us, Chris Gilbert is Professor at the Bolivarian University of Venezuela. He joins us from Caracas. Michael Shifter is Adjunct Professor of Latin American Studies at Georgetown University. He's in Washington, D.C. And Paul Dobson is a political analyst and independent journalist. He joins us from Mérida in Venezuela. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. Before I get into the analysis of the situation, I think let's just start with Chris and Paul. You are there on the ground. You felt this earthquake. Paul, just recall for us, you know that you're living in a country where there are earthquakes, but when it struck, what did it feel like?
Well, I live some distance away from the epicenter of the earthquake, but nonetheless, we did feel it here in the area of the country I am based in. Very lightly, there was almost no structural damage. But in the ensuing moments after the earthquake, James, I, like everyone else, I think, in Venezuela, immediately started to try to contact friends and family members in the affected areas to try to assess the level of damage, the extent of the earthquake, and check that everyone was all right. It was a couple of hours of panic, of certain chaos of trying to get the grips on the scale of what had happened. And that evening, very few people in Venezuela would have slept, I think.
Chris, you are there in the capital, Caracas, and we'll discuss this in a moment. One of the things about this earthquake is the capital took an almost direct hit. Tell us your experience.
Sure. I was outside of the house in the street, fortunately in an open area. I confess, not unreasonably, my first thought was that we were being attacked by the United States. Having lived through the attack 6 months ago, I quickly realized it wasn't the case and that it was an earthquake. There was a tremendous amount of dust that went up in the air, and everything shook for a long period. As people know, the earthquake, it was effectively two earthquakes, which caused a long period of movement, sound, dust in the air, and people started to evacuate the buildings immediately. My partner was in the building that I'm in right now, approximately 100 meters in the air. It's a seismically protected building, but precisely for that reason, it swayed in extreme fashion. And but fortunately, it held out well. That was not the case for many buildings in Caracas, but especially in the coastal area, which was hit harder than Caracas. It's in the coastal area, Vargas, La Guaira, Caballera, Cachalamar, the airport area, that is really where the worst elements are. You know, this is a natural event, and I think we'll get into this further on, but it's also strongly influenced by geopolitical problems. Essentially, the U.S. blockade on the country has weakened the country's infrastructure and capacity to respond.
And Chris, tell us the situation on the ground now. I mean, you know, that moment of terror with this doublet, they call this double earthquake that happened. But now I assume you've had a chance to sort of walk around and look at the situation, survey the scene.
Sure. I walked up into San Bernardino, one of the areas that was badly hit where I live. And you could see how many people had moved to the streets and set up essentially camping in the streets, following the instructions of the authority and following their own common sense. Actually, many people spent a second night outside of the house with their families sitting on and pets in bringing out chairs. And actually, there's a nice communitarian solidarity atmosphere here. In the sites that where buildings collapsed, the response has been effective. The government has responded with all of its resources, and the citizenship has also participated in a solidarious fashion. I should point out that thanks to the Bolivarian Revolution here, the country is well organized. The communities are organized in community councils, in communes, and that self-organization, which has been promoted by the Bolivarian Revolution, has actually been important in making the response more effective.
Paul, it was a national holiday. Do you think that has made things worse or better?
Well, the earthquakes, the doublet hit just after 6 p.m. Normally on a national holiday around that time, most people will be at home or out, maybe eating in a restaurant or maybe having a drink or something. Obviously, people were not at their place of work. The vast majority were not at their place of work, with the exception of some industries, of course. So, if, for example, in the residential tower blocks, which have been razed to the ground, there would have been fairly high occupational levels in these tower blocks. We're also seeing in some shopping centers, some malls, for example, would have been fairly well transited around that sort of time in the afternoon. Most shops would have stayed open till around 7 or 8 o'clock in the shopping centers to take advantage of the national holiday and the commerce that brings.
Michael, you obviously are not in Venezuela, but you know the country well. This quake hit the population centres, densely populated areas. And I've been reading also that a lot of high-rise buildings were there and they were built during the oil boom. And I've seen comments that these were buildings that were built fast and built cheap. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think so. I think this was part of the sort of the boom and kind of the curse of Venezuela. That there's a lot of money that was made, and there wasn't a lot of priority given to building units that could really last, that were really well made. And so it was kind of this was the kind of the mood that and the environment that was there, is kind of a boom, and not really investing in making sure that these buildings could resist these kind of terrible natural disasters.
Paul, the main international airport is disabled. I'm told possibly one runway is operating, but how do you think that is going to hinder the effort to help? And we're in this key moment where there still might be people buried under the ground. I remember covering an earthquake in Turkey in 1999 and watching a 4-year-old being pulled out alive after 6 days. There are lives that could be saved right now.
Well, Venezuela today, right now, 48 hours more or less after the earthquake, faces a whole range of logistical nightmares, James. One is the issue of the airport. Close to Caracas, there are other airports which can be used, especially for domestic flights. There are teams of rescuers arriving into Caracas as we speak from other regions of Venezuela, especially from the Andean region, which has a history of mountain rescue formation. And they will probably be arriving into alternative airports, which are conditioned for national flights. Internationally, most of the aid will be arriving on military planes, which of course can land pretty much anywhere. But this is just one of the issues that Venezuela faces. The issue of the power cuts, the telecommunications, a weak telecommunications network in the country, water supplies. Caracas has a long history of very, very bad water supply, gas supplies as well. And these are going to make the rescue operations a real nightmare.
Among those who are on the ground there, Chris, are the US Marines. There is a US Marine commander from Southcom, the US command for your part of the world. What do you make of the fact that the US military are going to play such a key role? Because until the end of last year, that would have been completely unthinkable, wouldn't it, in Venezuela?
Absolutely. I consider that obscene that the military is here. If you think about it, we were actually bombed 6 months ago by that military force, and our president was illegally and militarily abducted. And before that, we were under a tremendous sanctions regime, and then a strict naval blockade on our resources. So it would stretch the imagination to make us think that the very people who brought death and destruction through military means here and caused a rupture attempted to cause a rupture in the government, that those people would be capable of carrying out aid. I also like to point out that the actual rehearsal for this would be the case of the Haitian earthquake in 2010. Precisely in that point, the U.S. also responded helping, I say with strong scare quotes around that term, helping by sending an aircraft carrier and 20,000 soldiers there. And the result was sexual assaults on Haitian women. The result was a cholera epidemic. And the result was a de facto occupation of the country. So this seems to me extremely unwelcome. And it verges on the ridiculous to say that the United States will help. Now, the sense in which the United States could help would be to end the sanctions, which they have not done. And it could also help by releasing Venezuelan assets. The U.S. government still has frozen many Venezuelan assets. Finally, it could also help by returning the president of the country, who was abducted on false grounds of narco-traffic. And actually, if you think about it, the U.S. government's position is profoundly contradictory, because it rightly recognizes Delcy Rodriguez as the president of this country. At the same time, it claims that Nicolas Maduro was not elected. So, frankly,
sorry, Chris, can I just come back to you on your points about the military, though? Because at this moment, there are lives potentially to be saved. There are people under the rubble who are probably alive. The US military has capabilities that perhaps some of the other aid agencies do not, in order to rescue these people and save their lives.
Well, absolutely. However, I should like to point out that, for example, Mexico is a country who has already has people on the ground here. Mexico has quite a bit of experience dealing with earthquakes. Cuba, if it were not under the terrible blockade, genocidal blockade that the U.S. has imposed on Cuba, Cuba is actually the best equipped country to provide medical assistance. Everyone knows that the Cuban doctors have acted in a heroic and impressive way around the world. They responded to the last important Ebola epidemic. They've responded to earthquakes in Peru. They also have the cultural and linguistic abilities to actually help us. So it would be a mistake to think that it would be a mistake in a conceptual sense to think that this is a purely natural event. As I pointed out earlier, the actual lethal character of the event is the result of U.S. sanctions.
OK, let me bring in Michael on your points. What do you make of Chris saying the U.S. military should come nowhere near the situation? Do you agree with him on that? Because there's another argument that the US has taken effective control over Venezuela. They own what's going on in the country, and it's for them to sort it out in the short term.
I think it's an opportunity for the United States to show, and the Trump administration to show, that it doesn't just care about oil and business, which has been the main focus since January 3rd, and that it has an interest and a capability to assist. I think that, and to show that it can coordinate with other countries and non-governmental organizations, that it's not going to control and direct all operations, but it will be a partner with others that obviously there's enormous solidarity throughout the world. And I think the United States should be part of it. I think it does have a responsibility to help and help substantially. And it does have capabilities. There are needs that are in Venezuela, humanitarian needs, but of course there are also medical needs. There's going to be needs for reconstruction. And I think the United States can contribute. Whatever one thinks of what happened, and I think there are very legitimate concerns about international law and sovereignty that were raised by January 3rd. I agree with that, but I also think we're facing a monumental catastrophe and devastation. And if the United States has the capacity to save lives and assist Venezuelans, I think it should meet that responsibility and play that role.
Paul, Chris makes it clear he doesn't want the US military involved. The US, and I'll give you a quote here from the US Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio about the response: it'll be big, it'll be fast, it'll be effective. Do you think that is going to be the US response, given, of course, that part of the way the US traditionally would have responded to a humanitarian emergency is with USAID, its humanitarian agency, which clearly has been severely cut by the Trump administration, and in particular by Secretary Rubio?
Well, I think the Americans will, in this case, come in big. Yes, I think, and just to leave this very clear, this is not a justification. I agree with Chris that it is obscene to see the US military walking the streets of Caracas. But then nonetheless, as you rightly point out, we have needs of the moment, which, in my opinion, the Venezuelan authorities are not in a position to meet. The US government, I think now, as they do frequently through these moments of heartfelt tragedy and catastrophe, are seeing an opportunity. They're seeing an opportunity to shine. They're seeing an opportunity maybe to win over a few Venezuelan hearts, but they're seeing mainly an opportunity to get their men and women on the ground, to get their people in place, to take a leading role in what they describe as their hemisphere. Trump said it, I think it was yesterday, he said, we're going to look after our people in our hemisphere. This is how they are looking at the situation. But we would have to be extremely naive to think that this is a gesture of goodwill. This is quite clearly a business opportunity to get their military on the ground, to get their business investors here assessing, rebuilding, and to basically finish getting their tentacles into Venezuela, which they started essentially on January the 3rd.
Michael, we do have a rather strange situation here where we've got, as we say, the US Marines. We've got now the European Union sending relief efforts. And at the same time, Venezuela's old friends, countries like Cuba and Iran, are sending support. It is rather unusual, is it not?
Well, I think this, speaks to the gravity of this tragedy and this catastrophe and devastation in Venezuela. Sure. I mean, I think this should not be a political matter. It should be a strictly humanitarian matter and helping people in distress. And it's not surprising that, that there's been lots of very, very quick responses and generous responses to help and to assist. And I think, I think the United States should be part of that. There's past history that one can question, but I do think that no one can deny that the United States has resources, has capabilities, and of course they're very, very interested in that Venezuela succeed and that this government of Delcy Rodriguez succeed. This has been obviously President Trump talks about this as his great success in his second term. I don't agree with what happened on January 3rd, but I do believe that that I'd like to see my government do what it can to be helpful. And I think that others, the United States can provide support that other governments cannot provide. And I think we should respond to the fundamental needs of the Venezuelan people at this very, very critical moment.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to all of our guests, Chris Gilbert, Michael Shifter, and Paul Dobson. Sorry, one more time, because it wasn't Chris, it was Michael. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to all of our guests. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to all of our guests, Chris Gilbert, Michael Shifter, and Paul Dobson. Al Jazeera has teams on the ground in Venezuela, and you can also find extensive coverage on our website, aljazeera.com. To get in touch with us, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or look for us on X. There we are at AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, James Bays, and all the team here in Doha. Stay with us, though. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just moments.